The Supreme Court's ruling on tariffs is deeply disappointing, and I'm ashamed of certain members of the court.
If he were smart, given where his approval rating is on these tariffs and on high costs in general, he would try to get those refunds back to American consumers fast.
This is Today as It Happened. Good Friday evening. I'm Jacob Gardenschwartz, here with your chronological look at the biggest events and stories of the day, from the Supreme Court striking down President Donald Trump's sweeping tariffs, to the White House directing agencies to release files relating to UFOs. But first, this morning, congressional correspondent Nathaniel Reed gave us a look at reaction to recent developments surrounding investigations into associates of Jeffrey Epstein. Let's dive right in.
New Mexico's Attorney General has reopened an investigation into Jeffrey Epstein's former Zorro Ranch. The decision comes after reviewing some of those recently released FBI files, and prosecutors say they warrant further investigation. The ranch was allegedly used for sex trafficking of underage girls. Epstein purchased the large property in 1993, built a hilltop mansion and a private airstrip. But we're also getting more information about Wednesday's House Oversight deposition of billionaire Les Wexner. He's the former Victoria's Secret owner who was questioned about his relationship with Epstein after those FBI files alleged he interacted with young women in Epstein's presence. Scripps News senior congressional correspondent Nathaniel Reed is joining me now live from our DC newsroom. And Nate, this controversy is all around Washington. What is the latest that you are hearing?
Well, look, here's the thing about this. It's just continuing all throughout Washington. You're exactly right, but it's not just throughout Washington. It's all throughout the United States. Lex Wexner appearing on camera in a taped deposition in New Albany, Ohio, earlier this week. Only Democrats, worth noting, traveled from D.C. to New Albany, Ohio, to participate in that deposition. There were Republican staff members in the room. But what's fascinating about this interview with Lex Wexner is not only what he told members of the committee, but also what he didn't tell people previously, and that being members of course, the federal government. He testified in this meeting, this closed-door meeting with investigators under oath, that he had actually never sat for an interview with federal law enforcement previous to, of course, that meeting with Congress. Take a listen.
Has the FBI or DOJ ever directly contacted you or spoken to you about?
Not to my knowledge.
Never.
Did you speak to any law enforcement agency of any kind regarding Jeffrey Epstein's investigation in New York in 2019?
Never. Didn't. No, I don't remember ever talking to any law enforcement agency.
Again, a lot of the focus next week at the State of the Union address will likely be on Jeffrey Epstein. Some Democrats counter-programming the State of the Union, saying they're not going to show up in the first place. Big interviews with Bill and Hillary Clinton expected next week as well, again behind closed doors in Chappaqua, New York. But Stephanie, I want to pivot to some massive news that we just got in the last couple seconds. If I seemed flustered, there's good reason for why. The Supreme Court of the United States has struck down President Trump's ability to use tariffs. IEPA, they say, the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, does not authorize the president to impose tariffs. This is a judgment from the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, John Roberts. I'm reading through this decision right now, which just came out literally in the last couple of moments here about the president's tariff authority. Worth noting that this is coming out just before he's set to go in front, of course, of Congress, a joint meeting of Congress, to talk to Democrats and Republicans. He has been touting tariffs constantly. Okay, now I have a good idea of who has joined this opinion. Roberts, the Chief Justice of the court, has delivered the judgment of the court. Also, Sonia Sotomayor, a liberal justice. Alana Kagan, another liberal justice. Neil Gorsuch, a conservative justice appointed by President Donald Trump. Amy Coney Barrett, another justice appointed by President Donald Trump. And Justice Jackson, as well, appointed by Joe Biden, joined that decision. Worth noting that the two dissenting judges, Clarence Thomas and Kavanaugh, along with Justice Alito, all dissented from that decision. So pretty fascinating stuff there. The Supreme Court striking down President Trump's tariff policy, something that is not only likely to get a very strong response to say the least, from President Donald Trump, but also could have a major impact on the current world order. The president imposing sweeping tariffs on nations all across the country, a baseline 10% tariff on countries. And just yesterday, President Trump was in Rome, Georgia, saying that tariffs is the most beautiful word in the dictionary, something he's often said since the campaign trail. He's had this full-throated embrace of tariffs, and now the Supreme Court striking down those tariffs just ahead of the president's most major domestic policy address. The fact that a number of the justices that President Trump appointed to the Supreme Court himself joined this decision with the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, appointed by President George W. Bush, striking down the tariffs here. This, of course, going to have massive repercussions. Again, we can expect a very strong response from President Trump. These tariffs have largely been his idea, something that he has championed, he pushed through, in some ways steamrolling Republican members of Congress, including his own Senate Majority Leader John Thune, who has repeatedly told reporters like myself he's no fan of tariffs, but has been willing to go along with the policy because President Trump has felt so strongly about it. Now, this is probably just going to release a total tidal wave in how things turn around here, in just how the tariff policies could be unwound. Again, a lot of questions about where things go from here, Stephanie. And again, I'm just trying to monitor everything I can to just get a good sense of where things are going. This, of course, just breaking literally in the last couple of seconds here, Steph.
All right, Nate, we will have our Avid Joy Burnett, our legal affairs correspondent, ready here in the next few minutes to kind of dig into this decision from the Supreme Court a little bit more. We are going to take a break right here on Scripps News, and we'll be right back with more. Breaking news we're following this morning. The Supreme Court striking down President Donald Trump's sweeping tariffs. I'm Scripps News' Stephanie Lieberman. I want to bring in our Scripps News legal affairs correspondent, Avidjoy Burnett, who's joining me now live in the studio. More on this breaking news. We got this opinion an hour ago. We chatted a little bit. What have you learned now you've been able to digest the ruling a bit more?
So we're getting more of an idea of why a majority of the justices here disagreed with the Trump administration's use of this particular law. It's called IEEPA. And the Chief Justice, John Roberts, he was the one who wrote the majority opinion here. And he talked about the history of IEEPA and how it's normally used. He wrote it was enacted in 1977, and it gives the president economic tools to address significant foreign threats. The Chief Justice then goes on to say he does not believe what these tariffs have been used for so far should be classified as significant foreign threats. And you're seeing it right there on the screen. I'm going to read this for you. He said, based on two words separated by 16 others in Section 1702 of IEEPA, regulate and importation, the president asserts the independent power to impose tariffs on imports from any country of any product at any rate for any amount of time. Those words cannot bear such weight. That is a rebuke of the president's assertion that he is able to use tariffs to really regulate what he believes is an issue here in the United States. And it's a rebuke from the Chief Justice there in the 6-3 decision. One of the main things that we are really trying to understand, though, something that we talked about in the last hour, is how will this be executed? We know that there were 3 justices who dissented here, and Justice Brett Kavanaugh talked about how will all of this be unrolled, if that's the right word here. How do you roll it back? These billions of dollars, right? Yes, because keep in mind, economists have talked about the fact that about $175 billion in tariffs could potentially have to be reimbursed. This is something that's coming out of the University of Pennsylvania, Penn Wharton Business School, a really elite business school. And they're talking about those massive numbers that need to be reimbursed. And I also talked about what an official talked about with the collection of funds from Customs and Border Protection. They bragged, the Trump administration, at the end of December that they collected a record-breaking, that's a quote that they used, $200 billion in tariffs. So that's the other issue. How will that be refunded? And this is something that Justice Brett Kavanaugh was really concerned about. He wanted to know the how. And we're going to pull up on the screen what he wrote about that particular issue. He said, one issue will be refunds. Refunds of billions of dollars would have significant consequences for the U.S. Treasury. The court says nothing today about whether, and if so, how the government should go about returning the billions of dollars that it has collected from importers. But that process is likely to be a mess, as was acknowledged at oral argument. You were inside the courtroom for those arguments, and you see Justice Brett Kavanaugh here really using an everyday term, really highlighting the potential issue that we could run into in the coming weeks, months, possibly years, of how this particular ruling will be implemented when we're talking about billions of dollars and many importers who were affected by this particular policy from the White House and now this ruling, this decision from the High Court.
Right, and I know, and these tariffs, you mentioned a couple different numbers there, the 175 billion potentially impacted, but the country took in, more than 200 billion was what CBP is saying, and that goes back to the fact that this decision will not impact all of the tariffs that the president has instituted over the past year, that I think will impact a majority of them, but there are other legal avenues that the White House has used to institute some tariffs. Again, we've had this decision now for just about an hour, reminding all of our viewers that this is 170 pages of legal opinion from the Supreme Court. There is a lot to digest and understand here.
Yeah.
What type of responses are we starting to see?
So we're seeing responses that are kind of pre-cooked already. For example, the Attorney General of the state of California, I think they say they're maybe the second largest economy. It's one of the biggest economies here in the United States. He had a reaction here, and he said the Trump administration's illegal and chaotic tariff regime has come to an end. He's really applauding this decision from the U.S. Supreme Court, but he also went on to say, while this is great news, we must not forget the chaos that sent businesses, consumers, and global economies reeling. Many people, if you will recall, at the end of the year after Liberation Day was announced, many folks were trying to get ahead of the holiday rush. They wanted to hurry and buy items because they just weren't sure the impact that it would have on their ability to be able to import items. And we also know that this wasn't something that just affected businesses. Many people, many businesses said they were forced to pass on those costs to the consumers. So that's what this Attorney General in the state of California is referencing, the fact that there was great uncertainty and that the uncertainty could possibly continue now, even though we have this decision from the U.S. Supreme Court. I know you spoke with people on the day the arguments were heard, small business owners starting to get messages in asking, hey, we want to talk about this, because they believe this is a potential win for them, even if it doesn't undo what has already been done. They hope that this is something that will help them moving forward with regards to more clarity and certainty with tariffs.
Right, and I think some of that clarity and certainty is going to have to come from the International Trade Court that might be then deemed with the issue of now, okay, what happens to refunds? Kind of how do we put this genie back in the bottle? Scripps News legal affairs correspondent Avijoy Burnett, always grateful to have your analysis here on set with me. And this ruling, of course, by the Supreme Court comes as the president is still looking to expand his use of tariffs even further. He wants to pressure European countries to support his bid to take control of Greenland, but also international companies and businesses reacting to the news of this tariff decision by the Supreme Court. I want to bring in our Scripps News international correspondent, Ross Cullen, who is live for us from Paris. So, Ross, what have you heard in the last hour of reaction from Europe?
Well, just in the last half hour, we have had a statement from the European Union, from the European Commission spokesman, Olof Gil. He has said this. It's a shortish statement, but let me just read it, saying, "We take note of the ruling by the US Supreme Court. We are analysing it carefully. We remain in close contact with the US administration as we seek clarity on the steps they intend to take in response to this ruling. Businesses on both sides of the Atlantic depend on stability and predictability in the trading relationship. We therefore continue to advocate for low tariffs and to work towards reducing them." You might remember that the United States imposed major import taxes on the European Union in April last year when we had that announcement of the huge sweeping tariffs from the Trump administration. Then, in the summer, the tariffs were lowered to 15% when a trade deal was agreed between Brussels and Washington. There has been this unease and uncertainty in the commercial aspects of that relationship on both sides of the Atlantic, and the European Union, as in that statement, we understand, will be calling the Trump administration to see what direction are you going to go. Are we going to be able to have those tariffs that weren't in effect before? Can we have them completely removed now that the US Supreme Court has given its ruling?
Yeah, certainly a lot to follow as those Liberation Day tariffs, those April 2nd tariffs that you mentioned, were among the ones that were issued under IEEPA, under the standard, so they will be impacted by this Supreme Court decision. Scripps News international correspondent Ross Cullen live from Paris for us. Thank you very much for giving us an update.
Just ahead on Today as It Happened.
Other alternatives will now be used to replace the ones that the court incorrectly rejected. We have alternatives. Great alternatives. Could be more money. We'll take in more money.
Welcome back to Today as It Happened. Let's check back in on our daily briefing of today's top stories.
They take months and months to write an opinion, and they don't even discuss that point. We've taken in hundreds of billions of dollars, not millions, hundreds of billions of dollars. And so I said, well, what happens to all the money that we took in? It wasn't discussed. Wouldn't you think they would have put one sentence in there saying that keep the money or don't keep the money, right? I guess it has to get litigated for the next 2 years.
Let's go right now to our senior White House correspondent, Haley Bull, who is taking up her position on the North Lawn. Haley, the president not mincing words moments ago when it came to the Supreme Court, and that may be the understatement of the year.
Yeah, Del, certainly President Trump blunt in his comments on this ruling, while at the same time trying to project in his view that this gives him certainty in his tariff power. The president calling the ruling deeply disturbing, saying that the court's decision was incorrect. But at the same time, he sought to influence the interpretation of this as not impacting the status quo in the long run, citing other tariff avenues he could pursue. Some of those are sector-specific investigations that we have already seen the administration utilize. Some of them would be new pathways, but the president acknowledging that that would require a longer and more complicated process. One of the big questions, though, is what happens to those trade deals that the administration has sought, as this ruling stands to have major implications, given that he used the IEEPA authority to underpin much of his negotiating power when it comes to his economic policy as well as his foreign policy. Listen. When you are talking about the relationship with countries that you have sought trade deals with, do you anticipate that they will seek to renegotiate those? What do you say to them, and do you view this as a potential undermining power for your negotiations?
We're going straight ahead with 10% straight across the board, which was the absolute right to do. And that's taking place. That's a lot of money coming into our country. And then during that period of about 5 months, we are doing the various investigations necessary to put fair tariffs or tariffs, period, on other countries. So we're doing that period, but we're immediately instituting the 10% provision, which we're allowed to do. And in the end, I think we'll take in more money than we've taken in before.
And Del, the president acknowledging that when it comes to some of the trade deals, in his view, some of those will stand and some will be replaced by those alternative pathways that he potentially laid out there in the briefing. But one of the big questions, as Ava Joy mentioned, was that questions on the return of funds. And the president did not seem to have a clear answer for that, suggesting that could be something that is tied up in litigation. Additionally, Del, very notably, he lashed out at the Supreme Court justices who did not back him in this ruling. And he did not mince words in sharing his displeasure along those lines. He also went on to suggest foreign influence over the courts without providing evidence of that, Del.
Our senior White House correspondent, Haley Bull, on the North Lawn. Haley, stand by. Stephanie Liebergen, our senior White House correspondent, or Washington correspondent, with me in the studio right now. Confusion seems to be the word of the day because so many people are going to be wondering what happens next. One thing that will not be confusing is Tuesday night, the State of the Union address. It might be an icy reception for members of the Supreme Court when they enter the chambers.
I mean, typically those Supreme Court members, they sit right in the front row, and the president said...
There's not much distance in between.
No, the president said today that the 6 members that voted to overturn his tariffs, that they were, quote, barely invited to the State of the Union on Tuesday. So anticipating, the 9 of them will show up. But I think there is going to be a lot of confusion in the coming days, potentially weeks, as the importers, as Customs and Border Protection try to deal with, okay, these tariffs that were in place, what happens now? The logistics of still importing things that are imported in the United States every day that are likely had been subject to these tariffs. And the question of the refunds is the big question for all of those businesses. There are dozens of court cases that have already been consolidated at the Court of International Trade of these businesses trying to get refunds for the tariffs in light of this Supreme Court decision. So there's going to be a lot to keep our eyes on.
Thoughts of people in the room when the president came out and took the gloves off with regards to the Supreme Court, calling them fools as such. So a lot to unpack as we move forward. The bottom line is 10% tariffs across the board. We'll see whether or not that holds up. The Supreme Court saying that the president's use of tariffs is illegal. The president saying he is not happy. And as I have indicated several times, that is the understatement of the day.
Coming up on Today As It Happened.
One technician, one tower, one FPV drone. The entire story of Russia's desperation in a single frame.
We'll be back in a moment. Welcome back to Today As It Happened, Scripps News end-of-day snapshot of our biggest stories. Let's pick back up where we left off.
ICE now saying use of force was a factor in the death of an immigrant detainee. That is Gerardo Lunas-Campos, who died last month at the Camp East Montana Center. That is another of those for-profit detention centers, this one in El Paso, Texas. DHS saying he died after attempting suicide, but a Scripps News investigation revealed that Lunas-Campos was in handcuffs moments before his death. The county autopsy now saying he was killed. The death was ruled a homicide. Then a new document was quietly posted by ICE. It says that Lunas-Campos died after a spontaneous use of force to prevent him from harming himself. The statement does not elaborate on who exerted that force. We've reached out for more information. We are still waiting. Meanwhile, Camp East Montana is the largest for-profit immigration lockup in the country. It relies on the use of those private security guards. The U.S. economy growing at a slower rate than expected. New GDP numbers showing the economy grew at 1.4% in the final 3 months of last year. That is a lot lower than the 4.4% the prior quarter. Experts point to the government shutdown. They say that shaved off some of the higher growth when it comes to consumer spending. New York City's largest nursing strike in decades is poised to come to an end. This after more than 4,000 nurses walked off the job last month. They were seeking better staffing and job security at New York Presbyterian Hospital. At this hour, union negotiations and administrators have reached a tentative deal. Nurses say they will return to work next week if members vote to ratify. Former Prince Andrew out of jail this morning, but his arrest is rocking the United Kingdom. Police say he shared confidential trade information with sex offender Jeffrey Epstein while holding public office. He denies any wrongdoing. Scripps News International correspondent Ollie Barrett is in Windsor. That's where police are now searching his former home.
Police have continued searches on Friday at Royal Lodge here in Windsor. That is the property where Andrew Mountbatten Windsor used to live, the brother of King Charles, before he was thrown out of the property over his links to the convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. On Thursday, Andrew was arrested by police on suspicion of misconduct in a public office. It relates to claims that when he was a UK trade envoy in the early 2010s, he may have been passing information to Jeffrey Epstein that should have been confidential information that he would only have had as part of his role as a UK trade envoy. After many hours of questioning, Andrew was released by police under investigation. What that means is he's not been bailed. There are no bail conditions in place. He's free to come and go as he pleases for now. He has not yet been charged with any crime, and police investigations continue. Andrew has always denied any wrongdoing with regards to his links to Jeffrey Epstein. There is growing political pressure, though, in the UK for him to be removed from the line of succession to the throne. That would take an act of Parliament, and when parliamentarians return from a brief recess period next week, it's expected we may see moves in that direction. Ollie Barrett, Scripps News Group, Windsor.
Ollie, thank you very much. Meanwhile, the family of one of Epstein's most prominent accusers, Virginia Giuffre, is speaking out. They say the U.S. should take note of what's happening in the U.K. and start arresting people here.
He did say that he wants the full law to be upheld, which is such a stark contrast to what we're seeing from our own president, from our own head of the Department of Justice, Pam Bondi. Where is the accountability here? And so I would hope that they start to take note at what's going on in other countries.
Although Andrew now has been arrested, why isn't that same type of authority being taken place here?
So far, there have been no new arrests after the Justice Department here released those millions of pages of files from the Epstein estate. Attorney General Pam Bondi and Todd Blanche saying there is not enough evidence. In just a matter of days, Russia and Ukraine will have been at war for 4 long and bloody years. Peace talks in Geneva wrapping up with no breakthrough. Quietly, though, a decision by Elon Musk might be doing more damage to Russia's military right now than anything that happened at the negotiating table. Scripps News senior international investigative correspondent Jason Bellini is on the ground for us in Kyiv. He has a story on what is being called the bandwidth wars. Jason?
Del, one technician, one tower, one FPV drone. The entire story of Russia's desperation in a single frame. Watch this. Here's the context. Earlier this month, Ukraine appealed directly to Elon Musk, asking him to cut off the Russian military's access to SpaceX's Starlink. And with the flip of a switch, he did, blocking thousands of unauthorized terminals that Russia had been using across the front, smuggled through Dubai and ex-Soviet republics, activated in countries where Starlink is legal, then shipped into the war zone. The effect was immediate. Russian military bloggers started howling. Their message consistent across channels. There are no viable Russian alternatives to Starlink. So now we see the Russian military improvising under enormous risk, setting up repeaters and relay stations to sustain drone video feeds and battlefield communications. Here's something few people realize. Unmanned ground vehicles, UGVs, are now coming to scale on both sides. They haul ammunition and supplies to what soldiers call the kill zone. Starlink terminals mounted on board let operators pilot them across the distances involved. So when Russia loses Starlink, my sources say, they started losing even more soldiers than before, which feeds directly into Ukraine's current strategy, killing Russians faster than Putin can replace them. The technicians Russia's sending up those towers appear in compilation after compilation video as easy targets, sacrificing their lives in pursuit of this war's most essential weapon, bandwidth. Del?
Jason, thank you very much. Scripps News senior international correspondent Jason Bellini for us on the ground in Kyiv, Ukraine.
Coming up on Today As It Happened, is there life beyond Earth? Why President Trump is tasking government agencies with releasing documents related to aliens and extraterrestrial life, and what former President Barack Obama has to do with it. Welcome back to Today As It Happened. I'm Jacob Garden-Schwartz. Let's jump right back into our rundown of our top stories of the day.
Nissan recalling more than 600,000 of its compact SUV. The Rogue follows issues that could lead to accidents. The 2023 to 2025 models are at risk of engine failure because of increased oil temperatures. The 2004 to 2025 Rogues have broken electronic throttle body gears. Nissan saying no accidents have been reported so far. Owners of the affected vehicles can go to a dealer to get the issues fixed. Hollywood is mourning the loss of Eric Dane, the Grey's Anatomy and Euphoria star, dying Thursday after a bout with ALS. His death coming a year after he announced that condition. Dane is survived by his wife, Rebecca Gayhart, and their 2 daughters. He was 53 years young. President Trump now saying he will order the Pentagon to release the government files on UFOs and extraterrestrials. The announcement coming after the former President Obama appeared to confirm that aliens do exist, doing so on a podcast, though he later clarified he was referring to the likelihood of life on other planets. A recent Pentagon report finding no evidence of alien life.
President Donald Trump said that because of tremendous interest, he's having the Pentagon look into releasing files related to alien life and UFOs. The move follows comments made from former President Barack Obama that re-sparked interest in theories about life beyond our planet. Is there something more out there?
Do you believe in flying saucers?
President Trump pledging on Thursday to begin the process of identifying and releasing government files related to aliens and extraterrestrial life and unidentified flying objects. This after he accused former President Barack Obama of revealing classified information after Obama was asked about aliens on a podcast.
Are aliens real?
They're real, but I haven't seen them, and they're not being kept in, what is it?
Area 51?
Area 51.
I can tell you he gave classified information. He's not supposed to be doing that.
Obama later clarifying on Instagram, he, quote, saw no evidence during my presidency that extraterrestrials have made contact with us. Really. The idea of life beyond Earth has long fascinated the public. In 2022, Congress held public hearings on UFOs.
And so our goal is not to potentially cover up something if we were to find something. It's to understand what may be out there.
And later that year, the Pentagon created an office to investigate them. It published a report in 2024 saying it has discovered no evidence of extraterrestrial beings, activity, or technology. But Avi Loeb, an astrophysicist who heads a Harvard project searching for extraterrestrial life, thinks there's still more work to be done.
If the government tells us that there are anomalies that they cannot figure out, it is the duty of scientists like myself to help them figure it out. My guess is that the most exciting data or evidence was never disclosed.
The Pentagon told us it looks forward to fulfilling the White House's directive, but wouldn't answer any other questions. The White House, meanwhile, wouldn't tell us when we might get to see some of those files. Jacob Gardenswartz, Scripps News Group, Washington.
Now to the latest on a Scripps News investigation. We're taking a closer look at shooting incidents involving federal immigration agents in recent weeks. That includes a January altercation in Portland, Oregon, where agents shot 2 people after they say their truck was rammed in an unmarked car. It happened one day after the shooting death of Renee Good in Minneapolis. She too was sitting inside her car. Scripps News senior national investigative correspondent Lori Jane Gliha joins us live now, and she has obtained new surveillance video that sheds light on what really happened. So, Lori Jane, what are you seeing?
Well, Del, we've gotten some footage from a healthcare facility where cameras captured this Portland parking lot incident. And in this case, Border Patrol agents shot 2 people from Venezuela who survived their injuries. And now there are questions about whether the driver was trying to hurt the agents with his vehicle or if he was simply trying to get away.
Scripps News zoomed in on the images in this video. There's no sound, but it gives a new perspective into a Portland, Oregon parking lot shooting on January 8th, in which 2 people in a red truck were wounded by federal agents. In the video, you can see that red truck pulling into a parking space with several unmarked law enforcement vehicles gathering nearby. According to a federal arrest affidavit, Border Patrol agents were in those unmarked vehicles conducting a targeted enforcement operation. They were trying to find Yorlenis Zambrano-Contreras, a Venezuelan national who they say was in the United States illegally. She was the passenger in that red truck. The driver, also illegally in the United States from Venezuela, according to the Department of Homeland Security, was a man named Luis Niño-Moncada. In court records, Border Patrol agents told an investigator they initiated a traffic stop on the red truck with 6 agents exiting their vehicles and 4 approaching the truck. Federal agents said they identified themselves as law enforcement officers, giving commands for the driver and passenger to exit the vehicle. But they say instead of complying, the driver reversed. In one court document, an agent said the driver collided with an unoccupied Border Patrol vehicle with enough speed and force to cause significant damage. Another court record described the driver as attempting to run over the Border Patrol agents. That's when an agent fired at the truck, striking the driver in the arm and the passenger in the chest. These are photos included in court records showing both vehicles after the incident. What the photos and video cannot show are the intentions of the driver. Those are now in dispute. In court filings, the driver's attorneys said there is a significant question of whether the driver had any intent to assault or whether he was merely trying to flee. They also said the point is not simply that Border Patrol has used extremely aggressive and controversial tactics, but that these tactics and the widespread reporting about them are creating a climate of abject terror in the immigrant community.
And Del, this is the only video we know of from the actual incident so far. Agents initially reported that there was no video that they were able to track down, and no one was wearing a body camera, according to court filings. It was only this month when a healthcare organization released this surveillance video publicly in the interest of transparency after also being subpoenaed. Del?
Another reason why those body cameras are so important. So, Lori Jane, what happened to the two people who were shot?
So they are both recovering from their injuries, and in a plea deal, the passenger was convicted of what her attorney says was a petty offense called improper entry by an alien. The driver, meanwhile, was indicted on aggravated assault and on a federal employee with a deadly or dangerous weapon, which they identified as his truck, and depredation of federal property, Del.
This also raises the question about the tactics of ICE. Why did so many agents surround the vehicle in the first place? And what were they accused of doing?
Well, we know what's in the court records, and those court records say the agents were conducting a targeted enforcement operation focused on the passenger after a previous arrest and a failure to check in with the government. Also, immediately after the shooting, the government called the driver a suspected member of the gang Tren de Aragua, while also saying they believed the passenger was affiliated with that group. Well, later the court paperwork backtracked a bit, saying they believed they were just associated with the gang. But neither of the charges filed against the passenger nor the driver included gang allegations. And the driver's defense attorney has argued that the driver is not even from the part of Venezuela where that gang operates. Del?
Borders Czar Tom Homan coming out recently saying if ICE and Customs and Border Protection agents have done things wrong, they will be disciplined and dealt with. We will wait and see. Scripps News Senior National Investigative Correspondent Lori Jane Glihal. Lori Jane, thank you.
This is Today as It Happened. We'll be right back. You're watching Today as It Happened, Scripps News rundown of the biggest events and stories of the day. Let's dive right back in.
I think if he were smart, given where his approval rating is on these tariffs and on high costs in general, he would try to get those refunds back to American consumers fast. But given that he has staunchly said he supports these tariffs, I'm not sure that's what we'll see from the president.
Small business owners were among the first to feel the effects of Trump's tariffs. For many, the numbers just didn't add up. Gabe Hagan owns Brick Road Coffee. It was a small company that ran into some rather expensive problems. His coffee roasting company and cafe in Tempe spent $26,000 stockpiling coffee cups before the tariff hit, then another $75,000 from his expansion budget. He also says he's seeing customers pull back, skipping extras like muffins and sticking to one drink. We'll talk about the bottomless cup in a moment, but your thoughts on today's ruling?
Thank you for having me. Small businesses kind of needed this relief. It really affirms what we already knew, that this tariff policy was illegal, and it's a step towards hopefully some stability for us.
Gabe, math wasn't my strong point, but did you wind up spending $100,000 off of your bottom line just to stay afloat?
Yeah, I would say it's pretty close to that. Look, over the past year, we had to make drastic cuts from our build out of our roastery that we planned in 2024. I put in an initial $150,000 in working capital backed by my personal residence. That's kind of the last little asset I have to keep everything going as long as we can.
So you had to mortgage your home. Was all of this because of the tariffs, or did it have to do with reciprocal tariffs on things like coffee? Because as you know, a lot of the countries that have coffee beans aren't grown in the United States.
Yeah, a big portion came down to the coffee tariffs. It was when we built out this roastery that I'm sitting in, we did not budget for there to be 50% tariff on Brazil, that we didn't budget for there to be all these reciprocal tariffs on all of the origins we bring in. And we were doing construction at the beginning of 2025. So our initial inventory purchase in the summer of 2025 was well beyond what we had forecasted in that initial loan that we took out to do this expansion. And so that was quite painful. It definitely took up a lot of resources I needed to reserve and use for payroll and to really get this off the ground.
Gabe, a lot of us who do our grocery shopping and things like that look at 10% and say, well, that's not bad. What does it mean, though, for your bottom line?
It means my bottom line last year for my roastery, I was in 6 figures of loss.
Wow. Who paid the tariffs that you found yourself dealing with, you or the customers?
Both at the end of the day. We pay them. The green coffee that comes in, we have to pay that tariff when it comes to our door, when we import it. And then there's just nowhere else to go. I can't just absorb the cost. I do have to raise those prices to be able to keep the lights on as long as possible. So we did have to pass along some of the tariff costs into the price of our whole bean coffee.
Did you have to lay people off?
Thankfully, we didn't, but we did have to reevaluate our approach on our expansion. Like I said, we started the second location in our roastery in the fall of 2024. And by the time we were going to open in the summer of 25, we had a different business model and a strategy in place so that way we could operate with fewer people. So we didn't lay people off, but we hired fewer people to get the second location off the ground.
Hey, Gabe, the American public is usually pretty supportive when they understand that one of their fellow Americans is hurting right now. When the tariffs hit and people understood what your situation was, did the American public come in and help out?
You know, I think the community around us and around small businesses has always been a really supportive community. We see people trying to support their local coffee shops, restaurants, neighborhood joints. But at the end of the day, this much uncertainty, we saw it multiple times over the last several years, whether it be inflation or the supply chain, COVID, whatever it is, people are afraid, and that just is naturally going to cause them to pull back on their spending. So we're going to feel it at every small business, whether or not people are supportive or not.
You brought it up, but supply chain and COVID, had you just started to recover from COVID?
We opened our first cafe in 2021. So I feel as though I have been on this journey nonstop of trying to just get a break in the day. We started during the supply chain issues where there were ships out at sea, trying to get them in store so we could buy cups on a reliable basis. We finally started to see that settle down, and then 2025 just brought a whole new complexity that we just had no way of really forecasting for. So it's been a journey for the last 4 years.
Hey, Gabe, I don't usually do this, but if you just happen to be in Tempe, Arizona, I guarantee you, and by the way, I have no idea what I'm talking about on this, that Gabe's Brick Road Coffee is the best coffee in Arizona. Stop in and don't ask for the bottomless cup. Simply ask for another cup, because really it's costing him a hell of a lot of money. Gabe, it's good to talk to you.
Thank you for spending some of your evening with Today as It Happened. I'm Jacob Gardenschwartz. Have an excellent Friday night and a lovely weekend.